hidden threat. There were 3 of us, me, Michael, and our friend Sam. It all started as a joke over beers one evening. Michael had found mention of an abandoned caravan route in the Karakum Desert in an old book. The route supposedly led to a mysterious cave where ancient artifacts were hidden. We laughed, but the more we talked, the more the idea of exploring it captured our imaginations. A month later, we stood at the edge of the desert, our backpacks stuffed with water, supplies, and everything we thought we might need. Each of us carried a map, though they were clearly not very accurate. Scans from the same book Michael had found online. That only added to the sense of adventure. The first day was exhilarating. The sands shimmered with shades of gold and orange. The sun melted into the horizon, and the wind carried the dry scent of the earth. We joked, told stories, and marched confidently forward. By evening, we set up camp and lay on our backs, gazing at the endless stars. But by the second day, things started to go wrong. Our maps indicated there should have been an old well ahead, but when we arrived, there was nothing but sand. Everything felt as though someone had intentionally erased the traces of this route. By noon, the heat became unbearable. The water in our bottles was warming fast, and Michael began complaining about seeing mirages. He spotted what looked like an oasis in the distance, and nearly ran towards it until Sam stopped him. We decided to take a break, using a tarp to create some shade and conserve our strength. That evening, we stumbled upon strange tracks in the sand. They weren't animal tracks, but looked like deep grooves, as if something heavy had been dragged across the dunes. The tracks led toward a rocky outcrop that turned out to be more than a hill of sand. It was a stone formation with a massive carved entrance to a cave. We argued for a long time about whether to enter. Sam thought it was a bad idea, but Michael insisted. In the end, we all agreed.
The conductor approached.
We didn't want to return empty-handed. Inside,
Everything's
the cave
fine,
greeted us with cool air
with a
and
strange
an eerie
smile.
atmosphere. The walls
Just a
were
technical
etched with
stop.
strange patterns I'd never
His
seen
words
before.
didn't sound
They
convincing.
looked like scenes from the
The
lives
woman
of
nervously
bizarre
moved closer
creatures
to me.
with long arms.
What's going
and
on?
Unnatural proportions.
She whispered.
We moved deeper.
I don't know,
lighting our way
I
with
replied.
flashlights until we
But I
reached
don't like
a
it.
massive chamber. At its
Suddenly,
centre, stood
another
an
sound
altar,
echoed through
and
the
on
car.
it lay a
This
pitch
time
black
it was
shard
coming from within.
that seemed to swallow the light
Heavy
around
footsteps,
it. Don't
unnaturally
touch
loud,
it,
resounded
Sam
through the
warned.
corridor.
But Michael was already
The man with the book
reaching out.
stood abruptly,
The moment
staring
he touched the
toward the
artifact,
noise.
everything around
That's
us
not
seemed to
human,
come alive.
he said quietly.
The floor beneath us trembled,
I stared at
and
him,
a deep,
confused.
vibrating hum filled
What do
the
you
air.
mean?
We bolted for the exit.
He didn't
but
answer,
part of the passage
simply pointed
collapsed,
to the far end of the
blocking
car.
our way.
I
Panic
saw a
began to
dark
set in.
silhouette slowly
Then I
moving
noticed
towards us.
something.
The woman let
Carvings
out
on
a
the
small
walls
cry
were
and
moving.
grabbed my
They were
arm.
transforming into
I'll never forget
three-dimensional
that feeling.
figures resembling
A
the
mix of
creatures
panic
depicted
and complete
earlier.
helplessness.
They slowly descended towards
The silhouette
us,
moved
their eyes
slowly,
glowing,
each step
their
echoing
hands
like a heartbeat.
reaching out. What do
As
we
it
do?
came closer, the
Sam
lights flickered
shouted.
again.
Michael,
We all
still
froze,
clutching
too
the
scared
shard,
to move.
seemed to realize
I could
something.
feel the woman
Without a
trembling
word,
beside me.
he rushed back to the
The man
altar,
appeared to be
placed
muttering
the shard
something
on
under
it,
his breath.
and stepped away.
Maybe a prayer.
For a moment, everything
Then,
went
as suddenly
silent.
as they had gone
then,
out, the lights
with a loud
flickered back
rumble,
on,
the ceiling of the
silhouette was
chamber
gone.
began to collapse.
That's when I
we
noticed the
sprinted
door
down
at
a
the far
side
end of the
tunnel,
car was
not
now
knowing
wide
where
open.
it would lead.
The
Luckily,
conductor,
it
who had
led
been
us
standing
outside.
nearby,
We
looked like he
tumbled
was
onto
about
the
to
sand,
faint.
gasping for breath
It's-
and trembling with
it's-
adrenaline.
He
Looking
stammered,
back,
but couldn't
we
finish his
saw the
sentence.
cave entrance vanish.
We
beneath
decided it was
shifting
too
sands,
dangerous to stay,
as if
and
it had
moved
never
together
been
to the
there.
next car.
What was that? Sam
The
finally
conductor
asked.
led the way.
Maybe
his
a
flashlight
warning,
trembling in
Michael
his
said
hand.
quietly, still catching his
On the
breath.
way, he told us
Some
that strange
secrets are
things
meant
like
to stay
this had
buried.
happened before.
We decided
Passengers
never
on
to
this
return.
route sometimes
On
complained
the way
of
back,
unexplainable
we avoided
occurrences.
talking about the cave.
No one
But
could
one
provide
thing
an
still
explanation.
bothers me. Just
But
before
rumours
returning to
suggested
the
a
altar,
tragedy had
Michael
taken place
slipped
here.
something into his backpack.
What
He never
kind of
said
tragedy?
what it was.
The woman asked.
A few days
Barely
later,
holding back
we
tears.
made it out of the desert.
I'm not sure.
Exhausted,
The conductor replied.
but alive.
They say a train
Once we
derailed
reached the
on this
nearest
route long
town,
ago. No
we
one
all felt a
survived.
strange unease.
His words hung in the air.
Michael
like a
became
dark omen.
unusually quiet
We
and
quickened our
distant.
pace, while Sam and I
When we
avoided
reached the next
asking
car,
questions.
everything felt wrong.
Each of us just
The car
wanted
looked
to
empty,
forget the
but
cave
I could sense
and its
something
eerie
or
inhabitants.
someone.
The next
watching
morning,
us. We went our
the
separate
feeling
ways.
became unbearable.
Sam
when
left
we
to
heard a
reunite
child's
with his
laughter.
family,
While I
Someone's
stayed with Michael
here!
at a hotel to
The
rest
woman
before
cried
our
out.
flight home. We froze. The following
The
morning,
laughter echoed
I
again,
entered Michael's
closer this
room
time.
and saw him hunched
And
over
then I
something
saw her.
wrapped in cloth. A little girl standing
What's
by
that?
the window. I asked. She stared
A
at us
sinking
with
feeling
large,
tightening
empty
in my
eyes.
chest.
Help me.
Michael looked up, she whispered. His eyes were red, as if he hadn't
didn't know
slept.
what to do.
Without
We
a
stood
word,
there,
he unwrapped the
paralysed,
cloth to
until
reveal
the
what he
lights
had been
started
hiding.
flickering again.
A second shard of that same
The girl
black
vanished
artifact.
as suddenly as she
Are
had
you
appeared.
insane? I hissed.
The next
you saw
morning,
what happened
the
in
train
that
arrived
cave.
at its
Why
final
did you take it?
destination.
I couldn't just
Exhausted,
leave it,
but alive,
he said quietly.
We stepped
You
onto
don't
the
understand.
platform.
This artifact, the conductor
Calls
told us
to you.
he would never work
I
this
couldn't
route
walk
again.
away.
The woman
I wanted
shook
to
my
grab
hand
it tightly
and throw it out,
thanking me for staying
But
with
as I
her.
looked at the shard, we
I
never
felt
found out
something
what
stir
happened
inside me.
But I know one thing
It
for
wasn't
sure.
fear. It was
I'll
a
never
strange
board a
pull,
night train again,
as
as though the artifact was trying to reach into my mind. Do you realize what we've unleashed? I asked, struggling to control my emotions. Michael just shook his head. Number, I think we've found something that was meant to be found. His words sent a chill through me, but I didn't argue. That night, I barely slept, listening to Michael pacing back and forth. His shadow flickered under the door, and the low hum from the cave seemed to echo in my mind. The next day, we flew home. Michael remained silent the entire flight, clutching his backpack as if his life depended on it. Weeks passed, and I tried to return to normal life, but something inside me had changed. Nightmares plagued me. Visions of those sand figures from the cave, their whispers filling my room even after I woke up. One day I decided to call Michael, but he didn't answer. Worried, I drove to his house and found something deeply unsettling. The doors were locked, the windows were covered, and a faint hum emanated from inside. When I finally got in, the scene inside froze me in place. The room was chaos, books, torn maps of the desert, and drawings of those same cave patterns scattered everywhere. In the center of the room was a table, and on it lay the shard. It wasn't just a shard anymore. It had grown, as if pieces had fused together to form almost a full disc. Michael sat across from it, motionless, his eyes closed. "Michael!" I shouted, rushing toward him. He opened his eyes, and I stumbled back. They were completely black. "This wasn't an accident," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "This artifact isn't just an object. It's a door." "A door to what?" I demanded, panic rising. "To what's been watching us all along. I can feel them." Realizing we had to stop this, I grabbed a thick blanket and threw it over the artifact. Despite Michael's protests, I dragged the shard out of the house. Later, I drove to a remote canyon and hurled the shard into a deep crevice. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe I should have destroyed it, but I didn't know how. After that, Michael slowly returned to his old self. His eyes regained their color and he stopped mentioning the cave. But sometimes I catch him staring into the distance, as if listening to something. And recently, he asked me, "Do you hear that hum too?" That's when I realized our story might not be over. Ghosts of the Evening School. My name is Andrew, and I never imagined that an ordinary evening at school would turn into a real nightmare. It all started when our history teacher kept us after class to finish grading our assignments. This was an old school, built back in the middle of the last century. In the evening, as the sun set, its long hallways looked especially grim. This time, we were detained over something ridiculous. One of our classmates, Jason, played a prank on the teacher by switching his notes. Mr. Hudson got angry and decided we would all stay after class until he figured out who was responsible. By 7 p.m., almost everyone had left the school except for the 5 of us. Me, Jason, Lily, Mark, and Ellie. When Mr. Hudson finally left, we decided to wait until the rain outside stopped. It was November and the weather was dismal. Strong winds, rain, and a sky completely covered with clouds. We sat in the classroom, chatting and teasing Jason about his prank, when Lily noticed something strange. "Do you hear that?" she asked, lifting her head. We all fell silent. The school was unusually quiet, but somewhere in the distance we could hear a strange sound, like faint whispers. "It's just the wind," Mark said, trying to reassure us. But the sound grew louder. Maybe it's the security guard making his rounds, Ellie suggested. We decided to check it out. Stepping into the hallway, we didn't see anything unusual, but the oppressive silence made us whisper instinctively. As we headed toward the exit to check if the school was locked, we heard footsteps behind us. Turning around, we saw no one. "This isn't funny," Lily muttered. Jason, as usual, decided to make a joke. "It's just an old building. The floorboards creak. Nothing strange about that." But his confidence vanished when the hallway lights started flickering. The bulbs flashed more and more frequently until they went out completely. We were plunged into total darkness. Scrambling to pull out our phones and turn on the flashlights, we realized that all our batteries were nearly dead. The dim light from the phones was weak, but enough to see by. "We'll just find the exit and leave," Mark said. We headed toward the staircase leading to the main entrance. But when we got there, the door was locked. "I told you we should have left earlier," Jason muttered, starting to panic. "Wait, there's a back exit near the gym," I remembered. We turned around and made our way there. As we approached the gym, we heard the footsteps again. This time, they were louder and getting closer. We stopped in our tracks. "Someone's coming," Ellie whispered. Lily's flashlight illuminated the hallway. At the far end, we saw a figure standing with its back to us. It looked human, but its posture was strange. It wasn't moving, just standing there, slightly swaying. "Hey, who are you?" Jason shouted, but the figure didn't respond. Suddenly, it turned around. We couldn't make out its face, but its eyes glowed with an unnatural white light. We screamed and ran back the way we came. When we reached the gym, we found that the back exit was also locked. The windows were reinforced with metal bars, making them impossible to break. "What do we do now?" Ellie asked, panicking. We barricaded ourselves in the gym's storage closet, but the strange footsteps continued to echo outside. Lily, trembling, held my phone to provide light, but the battery was flashing its last warning. "This is impossible," Mark whispered. "No one lives here." Suddenly, the closet door began to creak. Someone was slowly pushing it from the outside. Just as we thought it was all over, a scream came from outside, followed by heavy thudding sounds. We froze, but after a few moments, the footsteps outside stopped. "Did someone save us?" Lily whispered. We cautiously opened the door. The hallway was empty, but the windows in the gym were now wide open. Through one of them, we could see the silhouette of a person. We ran to the window, but by the time we climbed out, there was no one there. The street was deserted, and rain was pouring in sheets. The next morning, we told the principal and the security guard everything. They dismissed it, saying no one was in the school that night and that the doors had been locked. But when we went with them to check the gym, we found the closet door smashed in. Since then, I've avoided old buildings. I don't know what we encountered that night, ghosts or something else entirely. But one thing is clear. The school holds secrets best left undisturbed. Night train. I've never liked night trains. The noise, the darkness outside the window, the occasional empty stations. Everything seems so foreign and unsettling. But this time was special. I was returning home after a business trip and couldn't afford to stay in the city any longer. The train was my only option. When buying the ticket, I noticed something strange. The car was almost empty. Only a few seats were marked as occupied. When I boarded, the silence struck me. Only the occasional sound of the wheels, the creaking doors, and the dim light of the lamps created an atmosphere that made it impossible to relax. My seat was by the window. Across from me sat a young woman in her mid-20s with long chestnut hair. She seemed a bit nervous and was staring at her phone. Beside her was an elderly man holding a book. We exchanged polite nods, but didn't strike up a conversation. As the train began to move, I tried to distract myself from uneasy thoughts, but things quickly went awry. About 15 minutes into the journey, the lights in the car started flickering. At first, I thought it was a routine technical issue, but then the car was plunged into complete darkness. "Does this happen often?" I asked the man hesitantly. He looked up from his book but didn't reply. The woman across from me suddenly stopped looking at her phone and glanced around nervously. Then I heard a strange sound, like something or someone running down the corridor. I turned to look, but saw only the faint beam of the conductor's flashlight in the distance. The woman across from me leaned toward me. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded. The elderly man seemed unbothered, but his hands were trembling despite his calm expression. A few minutes later, the train came to an abrupt stop, so sudden that I nearly fell off my seat. The lights came back on, and we noticed that the door leading to the next car was ajar. The conductor approached us, his face pale. "Everything's fine," he said with a strained smile. "Just a technical stop." His words didn't sound convincing. The woman nervously moved closer to me. "What's going on?" she whispered. "I don't know," I replied. "But I don't like it." Suddenly, another sound echoed through the car. This time it was coming from within. Heavy footsteps, unnaturally loud, resounded through the corridor. The man with the book stood abruptly, staring toward the noise. "That's not human," he said quietly. I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer, simply pointed to the far end of the car. I saw a dark silhouette slowly moving toward us. The woman let out a small cry and grabbed my arm. I'll never forget that feeling, a mix of panic and complete helplessness. The silhouette moved slowly, each step echoing like a heartbeat. As it came closer, the lights flickered again. We all froze, too scared to move. I could feel the woman trembling beside me. The man appeared to be muttering something under his breath, maybe a prayer. Then, as suddenly as they had gone out, the lights flickered back on, and the silhouette was gone. That's when I noticed the door at the far end of the car was now wide open. The conductor, who had been standing nearby, looked like he was about to faint. It's... he stammered but couldn't finish his sentence. We decided it was too dangerous to stay and moved together to the next car. The conductor led the way, his flashlight trembling in his hand. On the way, he told us that strange things like this had happened before. Passengers on this route sometimes complained of unexplainable occurrences. No one could provide an explanation, but rumours suggested a tragedy had taken place here. "What kind of tragedy?" the woman asked, barely holding back tears. "I'm not sure," the conductor replied. "They say a train derailed on this route long ago. No one survived." His words hung in the air like a dark omen. We quickened our pace. When we reached the next car, everything felt wrong. The car looked empty, but I could sense something, or someone, watching us. The feeling became unbearable when we heard a child's laughter. "Someone's here!" the woman cried out. We froze. The laughter echoed again, closer this time. And then I saw her, a little girl standing by the window. She stared at us with large, empty eyes. "Help me," she whispered. I didn't know what to do. We stood there, paralyzed, until the lights started flickering again. The girl vanished as suddenly as she had appeared. The next morning, the train arrived at its final destination. Exhausted but alive, we stepped onto the platform. The conductor told us he would never work this route again. The woman shook my hand tightly, thanking me for staying with her. We never found out what happened, but I know one thing for sure. I'll never board a night train again.